Hello, my name is Miguel Delatoy. I'm the professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at the Iliff School of Theology. And today, what I wish to do is discuss a little bit about the strategy in teaching on issues concerning racism and ethnic discrimination within the classroom. And while I'm speaking specifically as a Latino man, I believe that the strategy can also be employed by those who are of the white dominant culture. But speaking for myself, when I taught at a fairly conservative college early in my career, I know that when I entered the classroom, what they saw was a Latino body. And when I spoke about issues of race and ethnic discrimination, what they heard was an angry Latino. And to begin a conversation where you are being gazed upon as being angry, not just by the students, but this was told to me by even some of my colleagues who would ask me occasionally, why am I so angry? It becomes hard for them to hear anything I could say or anything I have to say concerning ethnic and racial equality. So trying to avoid being vilified or demonized, or what occurred at one point, people actually went to my door and laid hands upon it to pray for my salvation. I tried to get the conversation, or try to get the conversation beyond the body I happen to occupy. And I did this by first myself becoming vulnerable. So the strategy that I employed in teaching was that I began by literally confessing my own complicity with oppressive structure. So I began, even though the lecture was supposed to be about issues of race and ethnic discrimination, I began with gender oppression, with sexism. And I began by saying that I am a sexist. And I said this very loud and very clearly at the beginning of my class. I am a sexist. And I began to explain, how can I not be a sexist in a culture that for centuries has been patriarchal and has reinforced sexist oppression. At the very best, what you can say is that I am trying not to be a sexist. But it doesn't matter that I may march for women's rights or I may be in favor of equal pay. The bottom line is that the culture around me is sexist for me. So I could be as much as a feminist that I say I want to be, but at the same time, the culture will make sure that I will get hired first, that I will get paid more than a woman, that the privileges that comes with maleness will continue to occur in spite of how loud my protests may be. So for me, to move beyond being a sexist and maybe become a recovering sexist is to actively engage in dismantling these very social structures that are designed to privilege me. And by doing this, I try to move the conversation, not so much that sexism is such a bad thing, but that I am trying to move beyond this very bad thing, that I'm trying to become a recovering sexist. And then I went on to explain that just because just because a person may be female, may be a woman, a cisgendered woman, doesn't mean that she also cannot be a sexist, because the same structures which I'm complicit with has taught her sometimes to see herself through male eyes. So it's not just that as a man I'm a sexist, but we as male and as well as females are complicit with these sexist structures. So I try to move the conversation away from the individual in my classes to instead talk about the systemicness of sexism. Now, when I did this, I found that at least half of the class, many of them being women, were on board. They understood what I was saying. They were in line with what I was saying. So that made the next step a little bit easier to conduct. And in this step, what I began to talk about is, just like I am a sexist, all you white students in my class are racist. So there it is. I called all my students racist. And they were able to accept that truth because of the way I've been defining these terms. And what I explained to them is no matter how much they are for equality, and no matter how much they are with the Black Lives Movement, or how much they want to work with immigrants crossing the border, the bottom line is that the culture is racist for them. And they are therefore complicit with these racist structures. And then I made it very clear that as a light-skinned Latino, I am also complicit with colorism. In other words, just because I'm a Latino and have lived a life where I have faced ethnic discrimination, at the same time, I am privileged because I am a light-skinned Latino. So I talk about being a recovering colorist as well. See, now that we are all in tune with our complicity with these structures of oppression, then we can move the conversation beyond just trying to prove how my white students are not racist, to begin to learn on how to become a recovering racist. What does it mean to be aware of one complicity with social structures, even while working to dismantle those very social structures? So I guess the key that I really want this little podcast to deal with is really the issue of vulnerability in the classroom. How do I create an atmosphere where students have permission to be vulnerable? And how do I create an atmosphere where that permission in that classroom, it becomes a safe space? Now, what I've discovered is when I use this strategy, most of my students are ready to admit that they are indeed racist and they are indeed complicit with racism. And they begin to talk about how do we move beyond this complicity. And at that point, I think I accomplished the purpose of the class, which is to lean towards actual praxis. What do we do? So vulnerability becomes crucial in how I teach. And the only way I think that vulnerability can be created in the classroom is if I take the very first step and become vulnerable for my students, that I literally become an example of recognizing how I too am complicit with oppressive structures. Now, this vulnerability goes not just beyond my own body that I occupy, but also what I think of myself. Every so often, I'm challenged in the classroom, and I welcome that. I know there are some professors who want to have that last word and want to maintain the face of not making errors in front of their students. But I'm quite the contrary. I'm the first one that tried to tell my students how much I really don't know about what we're talking about, that I am doing my best to learn this. And I get this from my mother. When I told her I was getting my doctorate and I was going to become a doctor, she was an illiterate woman from the hills of Santa Clara, Cuba. And she had a hard time understanding that when I said I was going to become a doctor, it wasn't going to be a medical doctor, but a philosopher. But once she began to understand what the career choice I was making, she began calling me Doctor Come Mierda. And for those of you who don't know Spanish, it translates a little bit more vulgarly like Dr. Manure Eater. And that kept me humble because it reminded me not only of my roots, but also how much I really don't know and how much the academic pursuit of knowledge could become similar to just eating a lot of manure. So part of the vulnerability is the recognition and saying it verbally in the classroom, how much I do not know and how much I too am a student in this classroom trying to learn about how to deal with structures of oppression of which I myself am complicit. So the word for the day the word of this particular short 7-minute podcast is vulnerability. That I think we can make greater strides in the educational arena in proportion to how much we as scholars are willing to become vulnerable. Thank you. Have a good day.